What if you could defeat an army without ever fighting it directly? What if the most powerful blow you could land wasn't on the battlefield at all, but on the road leading to it? That's not a hypothetical. That's what's happening right now in southern Ukraine. And the scale of what's unfolding is only beginning to be understood. If you want to understand this war at a level most people never reach, not just what happened, but why it matters and where it leads, you're in the right place. Tap like right now if this kind of depth is what you're here for. Subscribe so you're here when the next chapter breaks. And send this to someone who thinks they already know how this war's going. They don't know this yet. Here's the foundation of everything you're about to hear. Napoleon Bonaparte, a man who conquered most of Europe, once said that an army marches on its stomach. He meant it literally. No food, no fuel, no supplies, no army. It doesn't matter how many soldiers you have or how motivated they are. A military that cannot be fed cannot fight. It fractures, then it fails. Ukraine has figured out how to make Russia's army go hungry. And not just one unit or one sector. 4 entire Russian field armies stationed across the entire southern front are now facing a supply crisis that Russian military bloggers, the Kremlin's own informal battlefield commentators, are openly admitting has no current solution. Let's build this picture carefully because the details matter enormously. In the occupied south of Ukraine, there are 3 towns most people have never heard of. Chernihivka, Kamyanka, Rozivka, small settlements. Quiet, unremarkable on any civilian map. But inside Russia's military logistics architecture, these 3 towns form what analysts have called the stomach of the war machine in the south. Rail lines feed into this cluster from multiple directions. Supply convoys converge here. Food, fuel, ammunition, spare parts, everything that keeps 4 Russian field armies operational. Came June 1st, 2026. Ukraine's 422nd Separate Regiment of Unmanned Systems Forces destroyed a Russian supply truck near the settlement of Yelivske in Zaporizhzhia Oblast. The strike itself wasn't unusual. Ukraine destroys Russian vehicles every day. What was unusual was the location. That truck was hit 23 kilometers southeast of Chernihivka. 23 kilometers past the base Russia considered untouchable. Ukraine's drone didn't graze the edge of the supposed safe zone. It flew straight through, came out the other side, and destroyed a truck that was carrying supplies toward the very logistics hub Russia considered immune to strikes. The safe zone doesn't exist anymore. But what makes this a turning point rather than just a successful strike is what surrounds it. That truck in Yelivska was not an isolated incident. In the 3 days between May 30th and June 1st alone, Ukrainian mid-range drone strikes destroyed 483 Russian vehicles on day 1, 524 on day 2, and 384 on day 3. Average that out. 463 trucks, fuel tankers, and supply vehicles destroyed every single day for 3 consecutive days. Each of those vehicles was carrying something an army needs to function. Food, fuel, ammunition, equipment, and none of it arrived. Russian military bloggers, the same voices the Kremlin relies on to maintain morale among military supporters, are already saying what Moscow won't. One prominent blogger wrote plainly, "They are just burning everything down." How to deal with this? For now, there is no solution. Russia's own informal military media, not Ukrainian propaganda, not Western analysis, Russia's own voices, are admitting that no answer exists. Now let's talk about the weapon at the center of this, because understanding the tool changes how you understand the threat. The drone Ukraine is deploying at scale is called the Hornet. It costs approximately $5,000 to produce. It carries a 5-kilogram warhead. Its operational range reaches up to 200 kilometers, but those numbers don't capture what makes this drone genuinely different from anything Ukraine has used before. The Hornet is AI-powered. It has been trained on thousands of hours of drone strike footage accumulated across every phase of this war. When it enters Russian-controlled airspace, it doesn't need a human operator feeding it instructions in real time. It finds its own targets. It identifies Russian military vehicles based on visual patterns learned from that massive training data set. Then it strikes. Autonomously. Precisely. Russia actually captured one of these drones intact. Engineers examined the hardware. And here's the humiliating reality of that moment. Without the software running it, the physical components mean almost nothing. Russia got the shell. Ukraine kept the brain. And the brain is exactly what's burning trucks across southern Ukraine right now. The impact on Russia's main southern supply corridor has already been staggering. Military cargo traffic along the R-280 highway, Russia's primary overland route connecting the Russian mainland to occupied Crimea and the southern territories, has fallen by 71% over just 2 weeks. That number was confirmed publicly by the commander of Ukraine's unmanned systems forces. Russia's main southern supply artery isn't being disrupted at the margins, it's being strangled. To understand why this is so difficult for Russia to solve, you have to understand how a military supply chain actually works in layers. Right at the front line, individual soldiers carry what they can on their backs. A little further back, cars and light vehicles distribute supplies to forward units. Further still, it's medium trucks, more cargo, more range. And deeper in the rear, large long-haul vehicles carry concentrated cargo from major depots toward distribution points. At the very back end, rail lines move massive quantities from the homeland toward the front. The critical insight is this: the deeper you go from the front line, the more cargo is concentrated in fewer vehicles. A backpack matters to one soldier, a truck feeds a platoon, a long-haul trailer can supply a battalion, a train feeds entire divisions. Ukraine is targeting the truck layer, the middle zone where enough cargo is concentrated to cause real damage, but spread across enough vehicles and enough roads that Russia can't simply build a fortress around it. Hundreds of trucks, on hundreds of kilometers of road, moving at all hours. And now the Hornet is loitering above those roads, watching with an eye that doesn't blink, identifying what it's looking for and acting. There's a reason Russia's electronic warfare capabilities, which have been genuinely formidable against earlier generations of Ukrainian drones, are struggling against the Hornet. Traditional drones that rely on GPS signals or continuous radio links from operators are vulnerable to jamming. The Hornet doesn't navigate the same way. It uses visual recognition. It knows what a Russian military truck looks like. It finds the truck. It doesn't need a satellite signal to do that. Russia's electronic countermeasures, built and refined over years to defeat one kind of drone, are facing a fundamentally different system. The technological gap is widening, and it's widening fast. Something else worth knowing: the AI targeting technology underpinning the Hornet is built on the Palantir Prim battlefield management platform. That system is not exclusive to one drone model. Ukraine is actively expanding this capability across its wider inventory of mid-range strike drones. What's happening right now, hundreds of supply vehicles destroyed per day, is the opening phase of a campaign that is still scaling up. This is not Ukraine at its ceiling. This is Ukraine warming up. Before we go deeper, you've made it this far because you care about understanding this war honestly. Here's something honest you can do right now. If you watch this channel regularly and you haven't subscribed yet, fix that. Hit subscribe. Turn on the bell. Not because it helps a number on a screen, because this coverage takes serious work, and knowing the audience is here is what makes the next analysis possible. Now back to what's happening on the ground. The supply crisis isn't a future scenario. It's already being felt by soldiers. Ukrainian intelligence in 2026 revealed intercepted communications from active Russian frontline positions showing the real experience of soldiers whose supply chains are breaking down. In one recording, a Russian soldier describes what his unit is living through. No food delivery for multiple days in a row, not reduced rations, nothing. 3 days without food on an active front line. Other documented cases describe soldiers in extreme circumstances resorting to desperate acts to survive, competing over what little food remained, in some cases crossing lines that no military command structure should ever allow to be crossed. These aren't isolated events meant to shock. They're symptoms. They're what a failing logistics system produces at the human level when the breakdown reaches a certain point. And the logistics lockdown campaign is specifically designed to take localized breakdowns and replicate them at scale across not one unit, not one sector, but 4 entire field armies simultaneously in the south. The civilian population of occupied Crimea is already experiencing a preview of what Russia's armies are heading toward. Reports from June 2026 documented grocery shortages across the peninsula. Basic goods, cereals, flour, sugar, salt, pasta, running low in stores across Crimea. Retail chains introducing purchase limits, restricting each customer to fixed quantities per visit. And rationing creates panic buying, which deepens shortages, which creates more rationing. The cycle feeds itself. The cause is direct. Ukrainian drone strikes are disrupting the supply routes that feed the peninsula. The R-280 corridor, already under sustained attack, saw traffic suspended on the Chonhar Bridge, a critical link, following a series of strikes. Russia's installed governor in occupied Kherson Oblast signed an official decree acknowledging the closure of a key highway segment. Think about what that means. A Russian-appointed official governing occupied territory had to put his name on paperwork confirming that Ukraine had shut down his supply route. Crimea is simultaneously dealing with a fuel shortage severe enough that gas stations are limiting individual purchases to 20 liters per vehicle. That's not enough fuel to run a supply truck from one end of the peninsula to the other. The fuel crisis and the food crisis are reinforcing each other in the worst possible direction for Russia. And Crimea's supply situation connects to the military formations in the south in a way that doubles the damage. Supplies coming from the Russian mainland cross the Kerch Bridge into Crimea, then travel out again toward the occupied territories along the same corridors Ukraine is now targeting. Every failure on the R280 hits twice, once for the civilians on the peninsula and once for the military units depending on the same route. It's a two-directional squeeze and it's getting tighter. The economic pressure extends beyond occupied territory. Inside Russia itself, the cost of sustaining 4 years of war is becoming visible in ordinary households. Food prices in Russia have risen dramatically across basic categories. Potatoes up by more than 160% between 2024 and 2026. Chocolate up 125%. Milk nearly 60% more expensive. A basic loaf of bread costs almost half again what it did 2 years ago. Shoppers are trading down from branded goods to cheaper alternatives, not as a lifestyle choice, but as a necessity. Real income growth is slowing while food inflation runs ahead of it across almost every essential category. Russia is not facing famine on the mainland. That is not the claim being made. But the economic weight of this war is pressing on every Russian family in ways that are no longer invisible or abstract. And every Ukrainian drone strike that destroys a Russian fuel tanker or supply truck adds to that pressure from multiple directions at once, degrading military capacity at the front, choking civilian supply in occupied territory, and contributing to the broader economic erosion happening inside Russia itself. Russian military planners understand what is happening. Their own independent bloggers and analysts are documenting it and shouting about it in public. And they have no answer, not because they lack intelligence or resources, but because the problem has no clean solution with the tools currently available to them. Here's why. The three towns, Chernihivka, Kamyanka, Rozivka, are not simply where Russia chose to base its logistics. They are where Russia's logistics are forced to concentrate by geography. There is no rerouting around them. There is no alternate corridor that avoids this cluster. The land routes converge here. The rail lines accessible to this area are, if anything, easier for Ukrainian drones to target. Larger, slower, more predictable, carrying more concentrated cargo per vehicle, Russia's own geography has created the trap it's now sitting in, and Ukraine's AI-powered drones are now positioned to turn that geographic constraint into a strategic catastrophe. The operational arithmetic is unforgiving. At the late May and early June rate, the campaign is destroying hundreds of supply vehicles per day. Each one represents food, fuel, ammunition, or equipment that never reached a forward position. Russia doesn't have infinite trucks. It doesn't have infinite drivers. It doesn't have unlimited fuel to run replacement vehicles. Each loss creates a gap in the supply chain that cascades forward, first into delayed deliveries, then into shortages, then into the kind of rationing and desperation that intercepted communications are already documenting at the front. And Ukraine is scaling up, not plateauing. The formal logistics lockdown program announced by Ukraine's Ministry of Defense represents a committed industrial investment in manufacturing mid-range drones at the quantities needed to make this campaign continuous and escalating. The Hornet is the current lead platform. It isn't the only one. Ukraine is building a drone fleet whose single defined purpose is to make the road network of occupied Ukraine impassable for Russian supply vehicles. What's happening now is the proof of concept phase. The concept has been proven. The scale-up is underway. For Russia's 4 southern field armies, the strategic geometry of this is bleak. They are concentrated around a logistics cluster that forms an inescapable geographic funnel. That funnel is now under sustained autonomous AI attack that Russia has no current technological answer to. Supply failures are already documented in active frontline units. The civilian population behind the front is beginning to experience the same shortages in their grocery stores that soldiers are experiencing in their supply chains. The campaign is not approaching its peak. It hasn't reached it yet. There's one more dimension to consider that goes beyond military logistics and economics. It's about what this knowledge does to the soldiers themselves. These are men who, in documented cases, have already gone multiple days without food on active front lines. They now know that the logistics bases they depend on can be hit, that the trucks carrying their rations are being identified and destroyed before arrival, that the supply chain they once trusted as a lifeline is now a target, located, tracked, and struck by a system that doesn't sleep, doesn't lose concentration, and doesn't need to be rotated off the line. That knowledge is not neutral. It does something to morale. It does something to the calculation a soldier makes about whether to follow orders, whether to advance across open ground, whether to trust that the system supporting him is still functioning. An army uncertain about its next meal is an army that has already begun to fracture in ways that no official statement and no state media report can repair. The fracturing happens in the mind before it shows on any map. What Ukraine has engineered here is not simply a logistics operation. It is a slow structural dismantling of Russia's military capacity in the south, targeted at the foundation rather than the surface, not the soldiers, the system that feeds the soldiers, not the front line, the road behind it, not the visible military machinery, the invisible infrastructure that keeps it running. Napoleon's insight about armies marching on their stomachs has survived 2 centuries because it describes something permanent about human conflict. Soldiers are not machines. They need food, fuel, rest, and the psychological assurance that someone is keeping the supply chain alive behind them. Take that away, systematically at scale, with autonomous precision, and the army that seemed formidable begins to hollow out from within. Russia built its southern front on the assumption that its rear areas were safe. That assumption is gone. The trucks are burning. The roads are being watched by systems that never lose focus. The generals in Moscow have no technological answer to deploy. The bloggers who support the war are admitting it publicly, and the soldiers holding positions across the southern front are receiving less food, less fuel, and less confidence in the system that is supposed to keep them alive. Ukraine found the weakness. It built the weapon to exploit it. It committed the resources to sustain the campaign indefinitely, and the consequences of what comes next, for 4 Russian field armies, for Russia's hold on the south, for the trajectory of this war, are only beginning to come into view. The hunger is not coming. It's already here. And the system delivering it is just getting started.